A disastrous season for Florida State in 2024. Will they bounce back in 2025? We are going to break down the schedule and give you an early projected record for the Noles in 2025. Florida State had a tough schedule in 2024. There weren't a lot of easy games on the schedule, and that contributed to the record that they had. And don't get me wrong, this team was not very good, but with an easier schedule, with maybe some cupcake games earlier in the year, maybe they would have found a way to get closer to a bowl game potentially. But you look at the schedule this year, and it's going to be another tough one, but they've got a couple of easy games on this schedule. So let's break it down. We'll start with the non-conference. They'll have Alabama, East Texas A&M, Kent State, and on the road at Florida. So they do have two easier games. You've got East Texas A&M, that's an FCS team. Then you've got Kent State, team out of the MAC. So you got a couple of games there, where Florida State really should not have too much trouble, which is really not what they had last year. When you go back and look at their schedule, they had Charleston Southern. That was like that one easy game. But then, even in the non-conference, they played Memphis. Memphis turned out to be a pretty good team. They had to play Notre Dame in the non-conference and, of course, Florida. So they only had that one game that was, an easier win. They'll have two of them this year. So there's a little bit of a positive, but still you got Alabama and Florida in the non-conference. So that's still going to be a tough non-conference schedule. Let's take a look at who Florida State plays at home and away, specifically looking at the ACC games. They've got Miami, Pitt, Wake Forest, and Virginia Tech at home. And then on the road, they play Virginia, Stanford, Clemson, and NC State. So you look at that home schedule, Pitt, Wake Forest, potentially games Florida State could win. Virginia Tech could be a little bit tricky. We'll see. Miami, rivalry game, that one could be interesting. But I would say, they've got some chances. If this Florida State team can improve, they've got some chances to win some of those games. On the road, Virginia, Stanford, not exactly tough places to play. NC State was not good last year. Now, Clemson's going to be a really tough one. This is going to be a really good team this year. But to me, this schedule is a little bit more manageable this year. I think it works out much more in Florida State's favor than the one they had last year. So you look at the full schedule. We'll go game by game. They do open up with Alabama August 30th. It's at home, but obviously this is going to be a really tough game. Alabama's going to be one of the more talented teams in the country. It's not the old Alabama. It's not the Nick Saban Alabama, so I wouldn't say they're unbeatable. But just considering where Florida State was last year, it's hard to see them winning that game. We'll see. East Texas A&M is next, so you got an easier game there. And then an early bye week in week 3. They follow that bye week up with Kent State. So that's not an ideal spot for a bye week between two of your two easiest opponents. Again, it just didn't work out well for Florida State there. They've got Virginia on the road September 26th. That's going to be a quick turnaround. You really would have loved to have had Kent State on week 3 and then a bye week before a short week, but did not work out that way for the Seminoles. So Virginia on a short week there, September 26th on a Friday night. Then they'll be back home for Miami on October 4th. Pittsburgh at home on October 11th, back-to-back home games there. And then you look at Stanford October 18th on the road. They get a bye week after traveling out west to Stanford, so they'll have some recovery time there. But you look at just kind of this first part of the schedule, these first 7 games. You got East Texas A&M, you got Kent State. Those are going to be your easier wins. But then you look at, Virginia's going to be on a short week. Miami, a rivalry game. Pittsburgh, you have to play at Stanford. So this is, you could see how it could easily start out similar to last year. They've got to find a way to win some of these games against Virginia or Pitt or Stanford. Really, if you're Florida State, you really would like to get to at least 4-3 in these first 7 games. But I think that's going to be tough just the way this schedule sets up. So they get that second bye week, October 25th. Then they'll play at home against Wake Forest on November 1st. On the road at Clemson, November 8th. I would say that's probably going to be the toughest game on this schedule, more than likely. Alabama and Florida there as well. So those are the 3 games for sure. That'll be really tough. Virginia Tech on November 15th at home. And then you've got NC State, again, on a short week. So we're talking about a Friday night game on the road. It is tough to go on the road on those weeknight games. So this schedule, you look at the overall opponents, you think, the schedule's not too bad. But the way it sets up, it is not ideal for Florida State. And then they do close things out again with Florida, of course, in the rivalry game on the road this year. So, yeah, I'm looking at a lot of tricky games here. Alabama, Clemson, Florida, obviously will be really tough. NC State on the road on a short week. Virginia on the road, short week. It's a schedule that the way these games set up, it does make it a lot tougher. But you look at just the opponents and you compare it to the other teams in the ACC. So Florida State's opponents for this year in the ACC, last year they were 30-34, a 47% win percentage. So this is one of the easier schedules in that aspect. But again, it's really closer to the middle of the pack there. You know, not a super easy schedule, not like Virginia Tech's, but it's obviously a much easier ACC schedule than Syracuse and Boston College. But again, you have Alabama and Florida in the non-conference. So I would say overall, you know, pretty tough schedule for Florida State. Before we get to the projected record for Florida State, just want to let you all know we do have a Florida State channel. So if you're a fan of Florida State, go check it out. You'll see a link down in the description below. The projection for Florida State in 2025 obviously should be better than 2024. Again, horrible season last year. Let's see what this projection looks like this year. But before we get to that, let's look back at the last 4 years. So we'll see kind of how they have stacked up against our projection with our formula. In 2021, projection was 6-6. They went 5-7, one game under. And then in 2022, the projection was 7-5. They beat that by a couple of games, went 9-3. And in 2023, projected to go 9-3. They went 12-0, beat it by 3 games. But then you look at 2024, projected to go 8-4. They go 2-10, 6 games under the projection. So, you know, they've really, the projection again has not really been very accurate of Florida State. It's been a tough team to predict. They've had some surprises, both good and bad, and we'll see. Maybe they are a surprise team this year. Maybe they bounce back. And they're a lot better than last year. We'll find out. So let's get to the projection. Again, here's the schedule. This is the scale that we use, and this is all based off of our tier rankings. So Florida State, we have 6 tiers in the Power 4. Florida State was at the very bottom last year. They were in tier number 6. And as we move into 2025, we can only move teams. This is just kind of the rule that I have. You only move teams up or down by 1 tier. So Florida State might be a lot better. They might jump up into tier 4 or maybe even tier 3. But because of the formula that we have in place, you can only move them up 1 tier. So I've got them in. So they have to wind up in tier number 5, which again is near the bottom. They could be a lot better than that. And obviously then the projection would change. But for this video, for this formula, again, this is a tier 5 team, which means if they play a tier 6 team, then that game would be like a 61-70% game in the purple. But if they play that game on the road, then it drops to a 50-50 game, and that's the way the formula works. So I think you do have a couple of easier wins. East Texas A&M and Kent State. Now East Texas A&M is probably close to 100%, like it's 99%. Kent State, on the other hand, probably closer to 80%. But again, you look at the talent of these two rosters. Florida State should win this game. They should be favored by 20 points or whatever. So you would expect 2 easy wins here in these games. Then we go to Wake Forest, another game where they should be favored. So Wake Forest is in tier 6, 1 tier below Florida State. So Florida State going to be in that 61-70% range here. Probably about a touchdown favorite if I had to guess. Looking at it right now, 7 or 8 point favorite. So those are really the 3 games where I think if I'm a Florida State fan, I feel really good. I mean, we should win these games. I don't even know if I'd say I feel really good about Wake Forest. If this team makes some strides and they're a lot better than they were last year, then yeah, I think you feel good about Wake Forest. But if they don't, if they're similar to what they were last year, then this game's probably closer to a toss-up. But those 3 games are the games where I think Florida State will be favored for sure. Now, they may be favored in some other games as well. We go to the flip side of this, though. We've got Clemson and Florida. So these teams are in tier number 2, plus they're on the road. That's why they wind up in the red. They are just too many tiers above Florida State. And then you've got Alabama and Miami also in tier number 2, but those games are at home. So those actually are in the orange, 20-29%. So, kind of close looking at these teams. But Florida State does play 4 teams out of that number 2 tier, that second tier. They don't play any tier 1 teams, so that's the good news. But you do have 4 games against tier 2 teams, and all these games I think will be really tough. Miami, I would probably give them the best chance against Miami just because the rivalry game, it's at home, all that. But these other 3 games I think is going to be very tough for Florida State to win. And remember, there's no human element here. I'm not making any predictions. This is all just based off of our formula. So we move on now to the yellow games, and that's Virginia. So Virginia is 1 tier above Florida State, and that game is also on the road. So that's why it is in the yellow. Plus, it's a short week, Friday night game on the road. Those are always tough. And then you get to the rest of this schedule: Pittsburgh, Stanford, Virginia Tech, NC State. All of these games do wind up as 50-50 games. These are the games that could go either way. So if you're Florida State and you beat East Texas A&M, you beat Kent State, you beat Wake Forest, and then you're able to win these 50-50 games, you could possibly get to 7-5, which is a big improvement from last year. But on the other side of that, what if they lose all these games? Then they're sitting there at 3-9, and it's another horrible season. If they split these games, then they're actually only going to be 5-7, and they miss out on a bowl game. But that's, the way this works is we average all the games out. So it's not exactly like that. We don't count Wake Forest as a win. We give them and the exact number we use is 65%. So 65 is the number there. So when we average it all out, what's the projection for Florida State? Well, it's 6-6. It's a bowl game. But I'll tell you what, the actual number is 5.5. So we did round it up to 6-6. But it's right there in the middle of 5-7 and 6-6. And I think that's pretty fair. I think for Florida State, a bowl game is a successful season. If they miss out, if they go 5-7, I think it's a disappointing season. Maybe there's a chance they really bounce back. They get to, say, 7-5 or 8-4. But there are going to be a lot of tough games on this schedule. So if I'm a Florida State fan, I'm rooting for 6-6. That's my goal. That's my hope for this season. And if they can get there, I'd say, a pretty good bounce back from the 2-10 that they were last season. What are your thoughts on Florida State? Let me know down in the comments below. Give me your projection. And just a reminder, memberships are now available on the channel. If you'd like to support the channel, you can do that. You can check out all the perks, details at the link down in the description below.